All right, so here's everything that we're gonna need to do a brake job on a Mazda CX-5. So here are all the tools that we're gonna need. So depending on whether you're doing the front or rear, you'll need your rear or front brake pads. They are specific, so make sure you be careful to get the right ones. Then in terms of tools, you're gonna want a ratchet and then some extensions if need be. A breaker bar is good for getting the lug nuts off. I also like an open end or a regular wrench, 14 millimeter. This is for the brake caliper bolts. 14 millimeter socket, and then a 21 millimeter socket for the lug nuts. You're also going to want a torque wrench. I have two. This one here is good for up to 150 foot-pounds, so for lug nuts. And then I like this thin one here. This is a 3/8 inch drive torque wrench, and this one here goes only up to 80, but it's good for doing the brake caliper bolts because it has a really thin head. So I like this one here. And then in terms of specialty tools you are going to need for the front brake pads, you're going to need to use one of these brake pad spreaders. These are like 15 bucks on Amazon, 10 bucks. So nice to have if you do just a few of these jobs. And then you're going to need some brake part grease or lubricant for the pads, as well as the slide pins. And then finally, you're just going to need your basics, some wheel chocks, some jack stands, and floor jack. Let's get into it. Alright, so first thing we need to do is loosen up the lug nuts while the car is still on the ground. So using our 21 millimeter socket and a breaker bar, we can go ahead and loosen off all of those lug nuts, and then we can go ahead and jack up the front of the car. Now, make sure that you're jacking it up with the proper jacking point. If you Google CX5 jacking point, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, but there is a flat spot behind the engine on the frame where you can jack up both front wheels at the same time. Be very careful to not jack up the car by the engine and to only use the frame. You can then go ahead and slide your jack stands underneath the pinch welds on either side of the car. Make sure that they are evenly placed and make sure that they give you enough space to work, and then go ahead and lower your jack. Once you have your car down on the jack stands, you can go ahead and add some wheel chocks to make sure it won't roll back, and then give it a little bit of a nudge to make sure that it doesn't move. Once that's done, we can go ahead and remove the wheel the rest of the way, again using our 21 millimeter socket, and I'm using a drill here just to make it a little bit faster. And then you can go ahead, remove your wheel, and then for added safety, I always like to go ahead and slide my wheel under the car while it's lifted, just in case a jack stand fails. This way you have the jack still under the lift point, you have your jack stands, and then you have your wheel. You can then go ahead and crack the two caliper bolts. These are 14 millimeters. I like using an open end wrench to get a little more leverage here, and then you can zip them off with a ratchet, nice and easy. Now, once we have our caliper bolts removed, we can go ahead and slide the caliper off the rotor and put it to the side. You want to make sure not to let it hang by the brake line. So with this car, I can actually pretty easily just leave it on top of the rotor and it stays there just fine. And then you can go ahead and remove your brake pads. And once you do that, you can then grab your new brake pads, attach the supplied clips that come with the new box, and then you can go ahead and slide those in. Here you can see one of those clips. Make sure that they match up with the old ones. You can use the old ones as a guide. And then you're also going to have to remove the two clips that are on the caliper itself. They just pry off like this. And then you can go ahead and attach your new ones, which should have also come with your new brake pads. Once we have all of our new hardware installed, we're going to want to go ahead and add a little bit of lubricant to the back of the new brake pads. Make sure not to get any on the front because that could potentially contaminate the brake surface. But we're just going to add a little bit behind where the piston makes contact, and then on the contact points on either end where it actually slides into the caliper. This will prevent excessive squeaking, and then we can go ahead and install this back into the caliper. Go ahead and repeat on the other side, and then once you have both brake pads nicely lubricated and installed into the caliper bracket, we can then go ahead and move on to the next step of the process. All right, now we need to go ahead and push the piston back into the caliper using one of these pad spreaders. Now these are pretty cheap. You can get them for $10 to $15 on Amazon, or you can just rent them from a place like AutoZone or O'Reilly's. If you do a couple brake jobs a year, it's probably worth it just to buy your own because they tend to be a little bit better quality. But either way, you're going to use your old brake pad and then just twist the tool until it pushes the piston all the way back into the caliper, and then you are ready to install the caliper back onto the bracket. Now, before we put everything back together, it's a really good idea to go ahead and re-grease your caliper slide pins. As you can see here, the grease on these is pretty old and kind of gross. So just wipe them down with a paper towel, get all the old grease off, and then you're just going to add some new grease onto the slide pins, which will again prevent any sort of squeaking and will allow your brakes to function as they should. Just a little bit goes a long way, and then spread it onto the slide pins before reinstalling into the caliper bracket. All right, so now we can go ahead and rotate our caliper back over and line it up with the holes for the bolts. You're may have to push in the little boots for the slide pins in a little bit to get it to fit properly. And then once you have it lined up, you can go ahead and start retightening your bolts. So then I'm just going to use a ratchet here and a 14mm socket to get the caliper bolts nice and snug before using a torque wrench to torque them down to the proper 24 foot-pound torque spec. Now all we have left to do is to reinstall the wheels onto the car. Go ahead and snug down the lug nuts before dropping the car down from the jack stands. So we're going to go ahead and raise the car back up. We're then going to remove the jack stands from either side of the car, and we're going to go ahead and drop it back down to the ground. Once we have it on the ground, we can actually go ahead and torque down the lug nuts to the proper 80 to 108 foot-pounds, remove the wheel chocks, and we are done. Thank you for watching.